How's it going?
It's
Excited to be
well,
here.
and it's funny that Scott, you and I were just at AFP together. It feels like just yesterday.
We were. We're becoming best friends very quickly here.
That's good. Well, Scott, I'm going to ask and turn it over to you. Give us a little bit, if you can, in the beginning here about Stay Classy. I'll ask some questions along the way. Of course, if anybody in the audience has any questions, we're going to take those more towards the end. But I'll be monitoring the chat, so you can communicate with me too as well, and I'll try and interject too. So, Scott, take it away. Give us a little bit more.
Sure. Thanks again, Derek, and really happy to be here. And I definitely will share this presentation afterwards, so no worries if you have to bounce. So first and foremost, we actually only work with social impact organizations exclusively. So whereas a lot of other online fundraising platforms, nonprofits and social impact is sort of one vertical of many. We exclusively work within this space. So we actually like to consider ourselves a social enterprise. And we really focus on not only helping you scale capacity, but also on the programmatic side. I'll explain that in a second here. We sort of have two pieces of our company. One is the community engagement platform, which I'm going to talk about, and a central part of that community engagement platform is the peer-to-peer fundraising, which we're really going to focus on today. And then the other part of our company is something called the Classy Awards, which maybe you guys have heard of. It's now grown over the last 4 years to be the largest social impact award show in the country. And this is really where we help organizations sort of tell their story on the programmatic side of what they're doing out there in the field, and then recognize certain ones. So this has been an awesome part of sort of our culture and growing. So we like to look at both of them together. As Derek mentioned, we recently just we have 3,000 organizations that have used the platform in full. Of our paying clients, the people that are there every single month, we just passed the 1,000 customer mark. You can see some of the organizations we work with on the slide: Oxfam, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and then some of the more progressive and younger ones like Invisible Children, To Write Love on Our Arms, and others. And what's interesting is it doesn't really matter how long you've had your organization up and running. Peer-to-peer fundraising really works for any organization, and that's been exciting for us to see. The adoption has been really quite fantastic. And the last slide just kind of shows, it's two points. One is that organizations using StayClassy year over year are growing pretty tremendously. So you can see 2010 to 2011, they grew their fundraising 95% year over year. In 2011 to 2012, they grew at 309%. And we cut out all outliers on this stat. So it's only organizations who raised at least $1,000. So the other part of this is that peer-to-peer fundraising, and I'll go into this much more in a sec. It's something that doesn't just happen automatically. You don't just turn it on, and you can find some quick wins in the beginning, but it's something that you adopt over time, and it's something that you learn and you get better at, and that's what these numbers kind of reflect. When organizations put in the investment to look at peer-to-peer fundraising as a longer-term initiative that ties into their overall development, they see far greater returns than if they're looking at it as just a one-off campaign.
Hey, Scott, a question to that. And
Sure.
when you're working with clients and individuals, how long does it take to sort of hit that stride where you started out, you might get some early success, but you go down and you have some challenges. What's sort of the longevity of that stride? How long does it take to kind of get there?
So it depends on the size of the organization. For small and medium-sized organizations, sometimes it can happen rather quickly, and peer-to-peer becomes, in some cases, a kind of a saving grace and a big quick win early on. You can raise a lot of money quickly, so they really love it, and they struggle with sustaining that sort of high amount of fundraising over time. For larger organizations, it actually takes probably, I'd say, 6 months for them to really get everything in place, because they have established processes. They have a marketing team usually, and things like that. So they try to get everyone in sync to support these campaigns. It takes a little bit longer. So I'd say 6 months total. But it doesn't mean that they don't get something smaller up and running right away. But to really maximize the opportunity, it takes several months to get the whole organization kind of aligned and on board.
Great, thanks. Go ahead.
All right, so now to the good stuff. We'll jump right in here. So you guys have probably heard the term crowdfunding thrown around with sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo kind of leading the charge. Peer-to-peer fundraising is a type of crowdfunding, and I'll kind of just go through some simple definitions to get everyone on the same page quickly here. So single-tier crowdfunding is it's basically one to many. So you create one campaign page, you promote it, and you raise money. Examples are like Kickstarter campaigns, Indiegogo, and just a simple donation form. And this has been around really since the birth of the internet, but recently, since really about 2009, the idea that anyone can raise money online for anything has really taken off, and with sites like Kickstarter. So crowdfunding sort of has been known as this campaign one to many type of format. Now, peer-to-peer fundraising is multi-tier, and really the big distinguisher here is that you create a campaign page, but your supporters create pages off of that campaign page. So each individual supporter creates their own personal fundraising page that ties and rolls back up to the campaign page. So in peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns, you could literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of individual supporters fundraising alongside each other to hit a campaign goal. So again, single tier Kickstarter, one campaign page, and the campaign organizer or organization sends that out, and people donate directly to the campaign page. And then multi-tier individual supporters can create pages underneath the campaign page and really tap into their own networks.
And Scott, we're seeing obviously a lot of rise of this. Did the run, race, walk world sort of start the trend of peer fundraising, or where did that really start from in this model of multi-tier that you see?
You're exactly right. The nonprofit space were some of the earliest innovators here, and far beyond anything else. And so the race, walk, run, ride type space was really the first sort of use of the multi-tier crowdfunding and letting individuals sort of tell their story as part of the organization's story.
Great. And when in looking at multi-tier and single tier, you mentioned that the single tier piece probably is the most often used in some with our organizations here who are putting out campaigns, asking individual people to then go to a donation page and support the campaign, and or even in an offline world doing that with direct mail and everywhere else. And then in the peer fundraising, where you're using sort of this intermediary fundraising page as a group collective, do you see one being more successful than the other, or where do you see a lot of donors coming in through these avenues?
Well, I think they both serve their purpose, right? I think then they can be done together in certain. It just depends. So, for instance, one example would be end of the year fundraising, where most organizations will do sort of that holiday appeal capital campaign. Peer-to-peer fundraising can complement those efforts, but I wouldn't recommend launching a major crowdfunding campaign, around Christmas and New Year's when people are thinking about making their end of the year donations to the organizations that they love and support. Again, it can complement it, but that's better. Just a direct ask is better and more appropriate during those times. And then there's other, examples of that, but I think crowdfunding in peer-to-peer really overall is a complement in addition to the fundraising that you already have in place. So, direct email appeals, those can actually convert higher in some cases than peer-to-peer fundraising. But if you pull off a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign correctly, the amount of not only money that you raise, but really new donors that you bring in, which I'll talk about in a sec, is one of the main benefits. So it's a donor acquisition tool just as much as it is a fundraising tool.
Great, thanks. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. So it kind of leads a good segue right into why does peer-to-peer work so well. So there's really two main reasons why peer-to-peer is so effective. You can multiply your reach by tapping into your supporters' social networks. So number one, if you launch a single tier campaign, you really are asking your existing supporter base, and they're not really incentivized to go share that necessarily with their own friends and family. In a peer-to-peer model, that's really the point. They set up pages and they're asked directly to share it with their own individual network. So you're starting to tap in a network effect. Your reach is much greater, and you're really now starting to communicate And that the second piece is complementary. So it's leveraging pre-existing personal relationships. So as you get better at peer-to-peer, you'll start to understand, who really are the top, who are your top fundraisers, who are the people with the most extensive networks, and you can treat them a little bit differently to really encourage them to support you in different ways. And you can get smarter about how you segment and communicate with each group. So the other thing, before I actually go into the stats that I'll mention, since we're on the line with Derek and he produces the Millennial Impact Report, I mentioned peer-to-peer fundraising gives individuals a medium or a vehicle for self-expression, so they're able to create a page and tell the story of why they're motivated and passionate about the cause. So they're really defining their own why, I call it, which is which is really why they're involved in the organization. They're sort of rationalizing and telling that story through the page, and this is actually very attractive to the millennial generation. So there's 80 million millennials out there. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Millennial Impact Report that Derek publishes, but 71% of those that were surveyed had raised money for a nonprofit in these types of ways. And it may not be exactly peer-to-peer, but basically when they were at, and then another 10% when asked said that they would have if an organization had engaged them and just asked them to do it. So clearly young people are liking this type of sort of empowerment and fun, in this method of fundraising. So I think the trend will only get greater over time. So this is kind of just some basic numbers from our platform that we pulled across a random sample of about 50,000 pages. The average raised per page is $568, and that's been going up, which is pretty extraordinary if you think about it. That's a lot of money per page. The average donors per page is 7, so about 7 people will donate to an individual fundraising page. And of the 7, on average, 4 are new donors completely to the organization. So,
Scott, let me make sure. So, out of 50,000 pages, of a random sample here, you got $568 raised in the numbers you see here. Interesting.
correct,
Interesting.
correct.
Good.
So over 50% of the donors on a page are new donors to that organization.
Hmm.
So it's pretty incredible, and that just shows you how your reach is so much greater with multi-tier. You're tapping into new networks. In a fun stat, our peer-to-peer, the average campaign is about $6,000, and varies. Some campaigns raise millions, some campaigns raise less than that. But across the board, the average is $6,000, which is actually significantly higher than a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo campaign. And I don't say that for competitive reasons. We're not even really competitive with Kickstarter. They don't even allow cost-based fundraising, but it's just interesting. The multi-tier, in our opinion, has a dramatic effect on the overall dollars raised at the end of the day.
Hmm.
All right, so we kind of covered these, but really the main benefits of peer-to-peer, you reach more people, you raise more money, and you acquire more donors. And stressing that acquire more donors is something that often doesn't get, or often gets overlooked initially when organizations are assessing whether they want to, take it or make an investment in peer-to-peer fundraising over the long haul. And again, there can be short-term benefits of a spike in fundraising if you launch one peer-to-peer campaign. But if you kind of commit to this, you can look at it as a significant donor acquisition tool. So there's 2 types of peer-to-peer fundraising that we think about. One is rolling peer-to-peer fundraising, which is sort of year-round, and I'll get into the details here in a sec. And then the other one is time-based campaigns. Those are campaigns that are launched with the intention of ending, say, in 30 to 60 days after they're launched. So rolling peer-to-peer, this type of peer-to-peer fundraising is anchored in your website and exists year-round. Charity Water, if anyone on the line is familiar with, they've really made this famous. They have a section on their site called My Charity Water that anyone can click on at any time, and they can start a personal fundraising page. And a lot of times, the motivation here is not a specific, promotion from the organization itself. It's actually an individual supporter's life event. So they happen to be participating in a marathon or a race or a run that isn't necessarily officially affiliated with your organization, but they want to make it affiliated with your organization. So really you're just providing the portal, the vehicle, the method for them to engage and fundraise for you anytime throughout the year in all sorts of different ways.
So that's an interesting piece. So you see this happening when major life events occur. So this happens with my own family. If somebody goes through a heartache or a challenge that they want to try and raise money for a cause, and so ensuring that your organization has the key pieces there for them to do peer fundraising, sort of take that impulsive passion piece to the next level. Huh.
Right, and this is equivalent. This is our version, and we like to think of this as sort of the new wave donate button, right? So on your website, every organization pretty much has a donate now button on their website at this day and age. We think they should also have a get involved button or a get involved section or this of their site, and this is where this type of stuff would reside. So when a supporter went into that section, maybe they didn't want to donate right away, they wanted to get involved. They go there and they're able to create a fundraising page, or maybe they're able to host a third party event, or simply invite other friends back into the website. So giving them other options is critical. And we're not going to focus on this as much today, the rolling piece. We're going to really focus on strategy around time-based campaigns, but maybe that's a subject for another webinar, Derek.
Yeah.
So this is the time-based campaign. This is bound by a specific end date. Typically, these are 6 to 8 weeks long, and there's a specific and more concise objective and call to action. So typically the organization will say, hey, we either have an event that we're fundraising around, or we have a very specific objective. We need to raise X amount of money by this time. Can you help us accomplish Y? And so there's a sense of urgency with these time-based campaigns, and really an enormous in the most successful time-based campaigns have an alignment of the entire nonprofit organization staff, really where they're putting everything behind this thing, and there's pretty massive communications around that to not only to the individual supporters, but from a promotion standpoint as well. And you could do, Derek, you mentioned earlier, how does peer-to-peer sort of match up with the single tier and the sort of the normal capital campaigns? And you can use this. That you can actually replace a capital campaign with a peer-to-peer campaign like this, a time-based campaign. But it can also act as a complement and do it in strategy for the organization from a long-term perspective is to do both. So you want to do rolling peer-to-peer and have a presence on your website, sort of a complement to the donate now button. Have a get involved section of your website, the My Charity Water, but also launch individual time-based campaigns throughout the year. And this shows, I think, 5 campaigns throughout the year. That might be a little much. I'd actually recommend 2 to 3. So you have it anchored on your website, and that's always there for people in between campaigns if they want to engage with you in different ways. Charity Water actually has the rolling peer-to-peer on their website, and then they only do 2 campaigns a year, and that's it. And we've seen that as that's actually a pretty standard trend we've been seeing, where you do almost less campaigns because you want your whole organization to really get behind those, and you don't want to burn your supporter base out or your staff. So the best sort of strategy for peer-to-peer is to do both together. All right, so this slide basically shows the phases of a peer-to-peer campaign, a time-based campaign, and we're going to go through each one, and I'll talk about some strategy around each one. And we made the assumption that the campaign we're talking about here is about 8 weeks long. With the planning phase. So this is actually where a lot of people go wrong, and they jump right into the campaign and they launch it right away and expect it to just take off. Just like everything else in life and in business, proper planning usually leads to far greater success. So you really need to do some groundwork, lay a foundation before you try to launch the campaign. So in other words, this is where you get your ducks in a row. So this is kind of our cheesy infographic slide. So really it comes down to 2 different things. You've got setting your goal and establishing your campaign theme. So first, setting your goal. This is how much you want to raise, based on what you want to accomplish and what your realistic reach is. So you want to look at, okay, we're doing a 60-day campaign, and maybe we want to expand capacity in a certain way, or you know, all sorts of different examples there, but coming up with a really tangible outcome for your campaign from a programmatic or an operational viewpoint. Then the other is, okay, well, that's great. We maybe want to raise, say, $50,000, but can we actually do that? Do we have the existing supporter base to actually accomplish this? So one of the ways to do that is sort of a reality check, is to add up all of your supporter base. So add up your email list, your social media following, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, um, and get a number. And then assume that about 5% absolute max will engage with your peer-to-peer fundraising page. And then use the averages that we showed on those other slides. So if you assume that, say, 2 to 3% of your overall list creates a page and raises $500 or a little over $500, what does that look like? And does that get you closer to your actual goal?
Now, Scott, why 5%?
Why 5%? It's actually just something that we've sort of come up with, looking at other organizations and kind of talking through it. It's not a statistical fact, it's just sort of a benchmark and just a way to sort of get a rough idea. Certainly it can be much higher, but it's sort of setting that lower bar expectation so that you can understand what's realistic. And oftentimes, I mean, we certainly see people smash through their goals and have absolute fantastic success, but it's more of just sort of a goal setting exercise that helps everyone sort of understand what the realistic expectations could be.
Right. All right. So add them all up, 5% of those, and then take the averages of what you got. All right. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. So the second part is establishing your campaign theme. And this is sort of like, what's your elevator pitch for this campaign? So what is it that you're fundraising for? Sort of the programmatic or the operational objectives, and make sure that you're able to communicate that to your supporter base. So in a second, we'll talk about designing the actual campaign online, but and it's sort of it's the content that gets behind the campaign. It's the copy. It's any videos that you might have, any pictures. This is where you're thinking about, all right, what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and how are we going to deliver that message to our supporter base? How are we going to communicate those objectives and get them, fired up and wanting to help us accomplish that mission? So that segues right into designing the actual campaign itself. And there's three main components of a peer-to-peer campaign that you would design. One's the main campaign page. This is basically the landing page that you promote to your supporters, and then they can create their own personal fundraising pages off of this. Here, the two main components are you have an opportunity to put a video on there, and you also have an opportunity to put copy, compelling message to your supporter base about what you're doing. What is this campaign up to? So the other one is the individual fundraising page. So with this one, you as an organization can actually control what shows up on a fundraising page when someone creates one. So let me give you an example. They come to your landing page, your main campaign page, they watch your video, they read your compelling copy, and they're excited, and now they want to create a fundraising page. So they click create fundraising page, and now they've got a fundraising page, but it's not blank. You as an organization have actually put in your own video on their page and your own suggested default messaging that they can change when they share their page with their friends and family, but you've basically given them a little help, and you've pre-written some copy on their page for them so that you can sort of help them understand what it is you're asking them to do. So for instance, it might be in the case of VFW International, the organization might write some default copy on an individual fundraising page about the veterans program that they're promoting at the time, or the specific program they're trying to raise money for. Stuff that the individual fundraiser wouldn't have a deep understanding of, but they can use it to then send out to their friends and family, so that frankly, so that it looks legitimate when they send it out to their supporter base, and it sounds like the individual knows what they're talking about.
And Scott, have you had any, or can you share any copy ideas or marketing ideas that have worked, images that have really been successful? Just ideas.
Yeah, so I think videos are always awesome, and one video is better than many. You have the opportunity, at least on StayClassy, to put up to 5 videos or images. We found that just one video is better than many videos, and make the video short too. Also, it doesn't have to be a promotional video, something that's professionally done, that you spent thousands of dollars on. Oftentimes, the most effective videos are actually personal messages directly from someone within the organization. So Charity Water, using them as an example again, the founder, Scott Harrison, gets behind the camera and speaks directly to the people that are hopefully going to get involved with each individual campaign. And sometimes that personal level of communication can be far more effective than a highly edited and polished video. So you don't have to think millions of dollars in video production here, but something that can speak to the individual person that has taken the effort and at least has created a page is a good thing. The other thing is to encourage fundraisers to upload their own video to complement the one that you put on their page for them. And sometimes this is just like a podcast. They just use their phone and videotape themselves and explain why they're getting involved with your cause. So giving them ideas like that, and we have lots of resources we can share with everyone on the line, sort of tips for your fundraisers. But yeah, encouraging them to do some things like that really help when they send out those appeals to their network, and helps connect with their greater audience.
Question came in. Any statements, marketing statements that have worked?
That's a really good question. You can kind of see in the background of this slide, there's sort of a banner that's been put um, into the fundraising page itself, and it's like an infographic. I don't know if you can see that, but
Uh-huh. Yeah.
basically that's sort of an illustration of where the dollars are going. So there's sort of a transparency element to it. It's showing, if we raise X amount, this is what it's going to do. So I think adding that level of transparency is key, and it's not from an accountability standpoint, right? It's more from, hey, this is the amount, this is our goal, this is what we want to do with this money, and it's gonna help us do X, Y, and Z. And the more you can clearly communicate that through the campaign, I think the more people will want to get involved. And even if 100% of the funds are, and this isn't usually the case, but even if 100% of the funds are hire a new development director if you're a really small organization, or to expand capacity in some way, just simply stating that and being honest about it and showing that and what that'll ultimately do in the long run, can be really, really effective. It's when those things aren't stated, that it gets either called into a question, or people aren't motivated or inspired by it, and they don't understand why their particular actions and their involvement is really helping the organization move the needle, in the long run. Did that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Go ahead, please.
Cool. So the third part is the checkout page. So this is an important page. You need this so people can make donations through the individual fundraising pages. So, one thing that we found is that, by doing all this branding, and part of it's the communication and the content on these pages, so the videos, the copy, etc. But with Stay Classy, at least, you can really customize the page from a colors and sort of graphical perspective to match your website or your organization's brand. And we found that that's actually super important. And Network for Good found, or did a study recently, I think it was last year actually, where they found that branded checkout pages actually converted, or was a 38% larger average donation. So people donated 38% larger gift when they visited a branded page versus a non-branded page. And a non-branded page would be if this was like a completely great page and it said like powered by StayClassy on the top or something. We take our name out of it and our logo out of it, so that from a user's perspective, if you promote this campaign through your emails or through your website, they want to, you want that experience to be seamless. They want to feel like they're within a VFW, in this example, environment. They don't want to feel like they went to a third-party website to do this. They want to feel like they're still connected with your organization. So that at the end of the day makes an enormous difference. So that's why we really stress it with our product. All right, so that was the first phase of the campaign, and the second phase is the recruiting phase. So now that you've got the building blocks and the foundation laid, you've hammered out your objectives for the campaign, you've set your goal, and you've worked on your content and your messaging. Now it's time to get people actually creating fundraising pages. So we break this up into two different phases. One is phase within the phase, I guess. One is a soft launch, and then the second is the full launch. So the soft launch is when you're reaching out to your core supporters to get them to fundraise early for you. It's it's only after some momentum has been built with the campaign do you actually launch to everyone else in your supporter base. So I'm going to just talk about this Kiva study for a second. A lot of you are probably familiar with Kiva, but there was this study done where they looked at all these different projects on Kiva.org, and their hypothesis was that the rate of fundraising or the rate of donations would actually increase as the project gets closer to its goal. So if the goal of a project or a campaign is say $20,000, after you hit the halfway mark and you've raised 10,000, does the rate at which you get from 10,000 to 20,000, is that faster than when from 0 to 10? So after 50%, is it faster than the first 50%, basically? And they were right. This was statistically fact. People want to see that there's other people behind the campaign before they contribute themselves. And as it gets closer to the goal, it sort of has an exponential effect, and the rate is increased over time. So going back to what we were just talking about, the soft launch versus the full launch, this is critical for campaign success. So if sort of a don't do example would be you create your campaign, you launch it, and then you send it out to your entire supporter base via an email and so expect it to take off. That's not the way to do it. First, you want to launch to your inner circle, which is really, it starts at your staff, and it starts with your board, and then it goes out a little bit more and maybe to your closest supporters and internal, sort of evangelists, and then maybe your closest volunteers, etc., and sort of onions out from there. But again, it's unbelievably critical to get momentum on the page from a fundraising perspective and a fundraising page perspective, so that when you do promote it to the wider audience, they can see that you actually have some people that have already started this, and they don't feel like they're going to be the first ones to do it. So after you build that initial momentum, when you actually launch your full campaign, this is where you don't want to hold back at all. So certainly you want to integrate it into your website so you can promote it on your homepage and say, this is what we have going on for the next 60 days. You want to blog about it. You want to take it to social media. So all channels there. So Facebook, Twitter, whatever you're on, whatever you feel is the most effective for your organization. And it says on here, you can't just repeatedly post CTAs to start fundraising, and that's critical as well. So you want to do a series of communications throughout after your full launch starts. And in the beginning, it might say, hey, this is what we're up to, start your fundraising page. But what you want to do is use the momentum from the soft launch to tell and say, we launched this campaign, start a fundraising page, go. That's not necessarily going to work. It might work to some degree, but you want to think about your marketing from an inspiration perspective. You want to inspire people to create pages, and the best way to do that is to tell the story of why other people have created pages and why the cause is personal to them. So to really try to unearth personal stories, and then use your blog or your social media to tell those personal stories, and that will then motivate others to take that step and tell their own personal story about why they want to get involved in creating a page.
So yeah, just to confirm, Scott, we're talking about CTA's call to actions and using the first soft launch stories to help use for the bigger launch. Interesting, a good idea. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yep. All right, so that's the recruitment phase. And so again, just to recap before we get into the prettier engagement phase, the recruitment phase is all about getting people to set up fundraising pages. So phase 1 was about planning your objectives and goal setting. Phase 2 was all about recruitment, so get as many people as possible to create pages. But there was strategy behind that. There was promoting to your core inner circle first to build momentum, because as the Kiva study showed, as you build momentum, it's much more likely that other people will get involved later. So being strategic about how you roll out the initial promotions of the campaign. So the third phase is the engagement phase, and sort of what defines this phase is you're not really thinking about recruitment as much. You're thinking about looking at who has created fundraising pages so far, and maximizing the potential of each individual fundraiser. So this is the longest phase of the campaign. It can last, say, for an 8-week example, this would be about 5 weeks long. And for most of the engage phase, what you want to look at specifically is, of the people who created fundraising pages, who has raised at least $1 and who has not raised any money. So we call the people that haven't raised any money inactive fundraisers, and we call the people who have raised at least $1 active fundraisers. And by looking at that basic segmentation, you can tailor your communications and your engagement strategy around both of those. Now, within the active fundraisers, there's certainly going to be people that we call your power fundraisers that perhaps have raised thousands of dollars, and maybe someone that's only raised $2. And those people are going to be different too, but at the most basic level, you want to at least segment your fundraising page audience, or people that have set up pages, by active fundraisers and inactive fundraisers. So this is the mid-campaign blues slide, and we put this in here because really every campaign sort of goes through this, and this is in the engagement phase, where you'll have an initial sort of spike in the campaign. You'll see a lot of people creating pages, and then people get bummed out because a lot of those people that create pages actually don't go on and raise any money. Across our entire platform, what we found is that about 45% of the people who set up individual fundraising pages raise at least $1. So that means 60% or so, or 55%, don't ever raise $1. So don't worry. This is normal. People, they're impulsive and they'll create pages because they're excited, and then they won't go through that next step. And there's ways of getting that up, right? But I mean, that understanding that you're not going to get 100% participation from the people that create pages is really important. And as you go through the engagement phase, you start to look at, okay, how do I get inactive fundraisers to start fundraising? But eventually it becomes, well, how do I just get my active fundraisers to fundraise more? And then you start to forget about the inactive fundraisers, because what we found is after the first week or so of creating a page, it's unlikely they'll come back and share their page. Really, right after the sweet spot is in the first 3 days. So if someone creates a fundraising page and they're inactive, you should be looking at, okay, in the first 3 days, I really have to start reaching out to this person to get them to try to encourage them to share their page again through email, social media, or whatever. And we've also found a really strong correlation between sharing and donations, and that's fairly obvious. But if people at least send an email out or promote it once on Facebook, it is unbelievably more probable that they'll receive at least one donation. And still to date, email is by far the best sharing method. So on their individual pages, they have a couple options. They have Facebook, Twitter, email. And email always converts better than Facebook. Facebook's number 2, and Twitter is really a far third. So if that, just kind of food for thought there. And this kind of speaks to what I was just talking about too, and even earlier, sort of the strategy around using the personal stories of your inner circle to promote to the outer circle when you're just starting. Well, that really never stops. You really want to keep telling the stories of the campaign. Look at all these awesome people that are involved and why they're getting involved, and use your blog, use social media, etc., to put these stories out there. And again, you can come up with creative strategies for how you interact with inactive versus active. But overall, you sort of want to have an arc of communication that's happening throughout, so that the campaign doesn't really go through, it doesn't become stagnant. And the last thing you want to do is stop communicating. So you really want to have a consistent communication throughout the entire campaign. But then you can have more targeted or surgical communications to the segmented groups within your fundraisers, and you may choose to have different sort of copy for each of those. And sort of lastly, to power through the campaign mid-campaign blues, and we didn't talk too much about incentives, but perks are a huge thing on sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. And I'd say about 40 to 50% of organizations use perks or incentives on StayClassy. So it's a very popular thing. It's by no means every organization does it, but a perk could be anything from giving away a T-shirt to the top fundraisers, or in this example is a trip to Uganda. So Invisible Children actually gave their top fundraiser a trip to Uganda with them, a volunteer trip to Uganda. So that's an extreme example. It's not always going to be the case, but it really can be anything. And a low end example might just be a shout out on Facebook. So it doesn't have to be something that even costs money, but really taking care of your fundraisers and appreciating them and promoting them and telling their story is going to be by far the biggest motivation for not only them to keep fundraising and raise their own goals, but for other people to get involved. All right, so that brings us to the final phase, the finish phase. So you obviously want to make a strong push at the end of the campaign, and if everything's gone well so far, part of this will just be pure momentum. Remember the Kiva study. So as you get past, say, 50% of the way towards your goal, and things are going pretty well, it's going to start to accelerate pretty quickly. So this is, next slide, it's the grand finale. And this is where you kind of want to bring out all the stops. And in at the last week of the campaign, you might send an email every single day. You might do 2 to 3 messages on social media every single day. So while we were talking about that consistent arc, so that you don't stop communicating at any time. Well, in the last week, you can kind of go a little bit to the extreme. So you want to make sure everyone that has ever even touched this campaign knows that it's ending. Sometimes you'll end up converting, just by doing that, you'll end up converting some low-end fundraisers or some people inactive fundraisers, and they'll sort of decide they want to get involved at the last second. But really it's about promoting and pushing your top fundraisers or your power fundraisers. So by this time you can pretty much forget about the inactive fundraisers and maybe engage them in a later campaign down the road. But for this campaign, it's very unlikely that they're going to, in the last couple weeks, all of a sudden become a great fundraiser for you. So you really want to be looking at, okay, what's our top third of fundraisers? So who are the people that have raised the most money so far, and how can we reach out to them? Maybe making personal phone calls in the last week and just thanking them. And if they've already hit their goal, maybe suggest to them to raise their goal again. Or if you've rolled out incentives, maybe tell them about the incentives. Maybe they didn't see the email that you sent out about them, so you call them. And sometimes this isn't realistic because you'll have thousands of people, but sometimes if you're a small organization, maybe a third of your overall fundraising pages is, say, 50 people. And that can make an enormous difference if you just shoot them a call or a text message or a personal email, and just say thank you. We're at the very end of this campaign. We're so excited that you've raised this much money. We're so close to getting to our overall campaign goal. Can you please share your page again? Or can you maybe invite your friends and family to get involved through your page? And stuff like that really goes a long way. It can push the campaign not only to its goal, but actually well over its goal in the last phase.
And Scott, we got about 5 minutes left, so want to make sure we get through all this thing. We got a lot of questions coming in. Please keep them coming in
Cool.
as
So we
well.
only have two slides left, so we're pretty much perfect timing here.
Great.
The X factor. So this is free Timmy here. So there's no substitute for your own creativity. One campaign that Invisible Children did far before they were famous, for better or worse, through Coney 2012. It was called the 25 campaign. It was a classic peer-to-peer campaign, but they actually made a really ambitious goal. It was like $3 million. And they had raised a little over 50% of that. So they had actually done, by a lot of people's standards, ridiculously well. But they were far from hitting their goal, and they were about 2 weeks left. So what they did was they found one of their staff members who was kind of this goofy character that did a lot of different stuff on blogs, and they actually took a big animal cage that they had in their office. I have no idea why, and they put Timmy in the cage and basically live streamed it so that their supporters could see Timmy in the cage. And as they hit certain milestones, he got to he eventually got to get out of the cage. So it was a complete joke, but little things like this, we see weird, sort of quirky ideas like this all over the place, and sometimes those can be really engaging and fun. So while we don't suggest trapping your staff members in cages to hit your goal, this was just an example of a completely weird thing that we did see. So again, there's no substitute for your own creativity. What I've gone through today are really just guidelines for you, and it's some basic strategy, but the more creative you can get with your campaign and really motivating your supporters to get involved and engage with you, the better.
Well, I'm sure that there are some individuals on the line that would maybe think or have that thought about trapping some of their staff members, but we highly suggest that you do not do that. All right, Scott, give us a final few notes here, and then we'll get to the questions.
Yeah, so I mean, wrapping it up, they're wrapping the whole entire thing up. There are two types of peer-to-peer fundraising. There's the rolling type, which is anchored on your website, which never really goes away, allows your supporters to engage with you at any time and at any place. And then the other one is time-based campaigns, and those are more similar to, say, a traditional capital campaign, but involve peer-to-peer fundraising pages as well. And then we went through the four phases of a successful peer-to-peer fundraising time-based campaign. Um, the planning, the recruitment, the engagement, and the finale. And each one has sort of one or two major strategic points to help you be successful and hit your goal and have a successful peer-to-peer fundraising campaign. So that's pretty much it.
Great, thanks, Scott. All right, so we've got some questions here coming in. So feel free to put your questions in the question panel here on your GoToWebinar control panel if you have any. Scott, here is the first question for you, which is how do you talk to boards about peer-to-peer fundraising and let them know that this is a good idea?
That's a really good question. Well, well, number one, we've put together some decks that lay out the business case for it. So we had one slide in this deck that talked about the average amount raised per page. What we found is that boards like to look at numbers and how whatever campaign it is or whatever type of fundraising that you're wanting to do, they're going to look at the bottom line and say, hey, is this going to be effective for our organization? What are the numbers behind this? Show me some proof. So we created a deck specifically for boards that is full of case studies and numbers. And we found that that's really helped a lot. And they don't need to know all the intricacies. You don't have to tell them about all these different strategic elements. But if they know that the average peer-to-peer campaign raises X, and the average amount of pages raises Y, and you guys have a supporter base of whatever it is, and you can sort of do the math for them and lay out the business case, that typically is the best way of doing it.
Next question is around the examples that you showed, Scott, are great and wonderful. However, we're a small organization. Do you think it's really feasible to reach the numbers you talked about given our size and limitations with a budget below 500,000?
Absolutely. The majority of our customer base is below $500,000 annual budget. And they've seen tremendous success. I think it just comes down to being realistic about setting your goal. Are you going to, raise a couple $1,000,000 in your first peer-to-peer campaign? Probably not. But you can look at peer-to-peer as a complement to what you're doing existing, and at least experiment with it and try it out. And set a goal. Again, sort of looking at your list, your email list, your social media presence, and doing the back math and trying to figure out, what's realistic with this. And the averages are very similar. So what's interesting is a person that supports a small organization is going to raise $568, just like a person that supports Oxfam or a large organization. It doesn't matter. It really is independent of the organization that they're supporting. Really, those numbers are driven up by other factors, like the store, how compelling the personal fundraising page is, how good they are at retelling the organization's story. So stuff that really is not dependent on size. It's more of that strategy stuff that I was talking about. So I think it's applicable for any sized organization.
This is an interesting one, which I like. So, are you ready for this? This
Oh
one
yeah.
is around not having a constituency, and so the discussion here is Scott. I really enjoy and like the two strategies: launching it with your close personal friends and then your larger networks. It happens in our case that we don't have a lot of constituents, fans, followers, everybody else. In our
Mhm.
situation, what would you do, considering that the people that would promote the campaign would be the same people probably in both camps? Let me know what you think. So I think what she's saying is the challenge they have is that they don't have a big following, and a lot of the people that they do that follow them tend to be their biggest evangelists and supporters. So any ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, that's in it. Without knowing the broader story there, the context, it's a little bit difficult to answer. But I would say, we actually one example that comes to mind is I mentioned that end of the year capital campaign. A couple organizations tried an experiment on our suggestion, actually, and it ended up working, thankfully. But they replaced the traditional capital campaign with each board member and inner staff creating a personal fundraising page and going out and doing a personal to do the traditional ask. And what made that special was it wasn't just the traditional direct mail or email or whatever with the organization's story. It was each individual board member and each individual staff member telling why they got involved with the organization in the first place and what inspired them to get up every day out of bed and be excited for work. And that worked exceptionally well. And they ended up raising more money in both cases than they had the previous year with their traditional capital campaign. So that's just an example. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But I think there's definitely creative ways to do it where you don't need 1,000, 1,000 or 10,000 supporters to pull this off. Certainly, the upside with a large supporter base is going to be greater than with a low supporter base. But it's just about managing your expectations and what you're trying to get out of it, I think.
Good. All right, Scott. Next one is around, we've talked about it, run, race, walk. The question is, have you seen peer fundraising be successful with run, race, walks? And if so, are there any in particular run, race, walks where the peer fundraising model tends to work better than others? I think they're mentioning types of run, race, walk programs.
Yeah, we've seen, yeah, the answer is absolutely. We've seen anything from the traditional 5K walker race to bikeathons, sort of spinathon stuff in gyms, to traditional cycling events, to events where actually there's one event called Over the Edge where they partner with a nonprofit in a different city and you scale or rappel down the tallest building in the city. And that's an event program, but it's with personal fundraising. So you raise money and get your friends and family to sponsor you to rappel down this building. And that was actually one of the first events that was ever on StayClassy when we first launched. So going back to that creativity thing, I think it really just depends. But the more traditional race walks certainly use peer-to-peer fundraising. There's two ways that they can do it, or that we see at least. One is you purchase a registration first, and then you create a personal fundraising page second. So that would be, okay, it's $40 to participate in this race, and then when after I purchased my ticket, I'm sent a link to a personal fundraising page that was automatically created for me, and it's clearly communicated that if I raise X amount of dollars, I'm going to get certain incentives or perks at the event or T-shirts or whatever it is. That's something we see all the time. The other is what we call fundraise for entry. So it's an event that you actually have to set up a fundraising page and hit a goal just to attend. So
Hmm.
Susan G. Komen Race for a Cure is a good example. I don't know what the limit is now, but in the a year or two ago, you had to raise $2,200 just to participate in the event. So we see that model a lot too. And once they hit that goal, we have our system automatically sends them the ticket to the event or the registration form for that event. So it's this interesting combination of a pure online peer-to-peer and an offline sort of event model as well. So yeah, we see a lot of that on our platform for sure.
Good. Next question is around celebrities and ambassadors. This question comes in from John, and it says, "Does do you have any data that talks about the use of celebrities and or local talent to help a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign?"
Mhm. I don't have any data on me right now. I can give you a couple examples. Overall, though, my opinion is that celebrities can help, but oftentimes it's superficial, and it mainly meaning they'll draw eyeballs potentially, but it doesn't necessarily boost the actual level of engagement. So I'll give you an example. Pencils of Promise is on our platform, and their main endorser is Justin Bieber, and clearly Justin Bieber has an enormous fan base. Well, when Justin Bieber first promoted the Schools for All campaign a year or so ago for Pencils of Promise, he brought 40,000 unique visitors to the Pencils of Promise campaign page with one tweet. So 40,000 people. And the amount of people that set up pages were phenomenal. But the actual amount, remember I said that about 40%, 45% of people that set up pages go on to raise at least $1. Well, the percentage for that campaign was 3%. So 3% of the people that created pages actually went on to raise $1. So it brought eyeballs, but at the end of the day, a normal campaign without a celebrity actually converted better. And they still went on to raise a good amount of money. I'm not saying Justin Bieber isn't a good person to have in your back pocket if you need some promotional support, but it doesn't always make the difference. And a lot of times it can be sort of on the surface level effective, but not necessarily for that deeper level engagement.
Great.
That being said, we do have a lot of organizations that will have celebrities or other personalities create their own personal fundraising pages as part of the campaign and fundraise alongside other people. That I think is a better strategy versus just Justin Bieber saying, "Hey, go to this page now and create a page." Like we had Scarlett Johansson, I think, fundraised for Oxfam, and it was cool because she was just in the mix with all the other people around the country fundraising. Nothing special. They promoted our page a little bit, but it was more to just show sort of that commonality and that common purpose across the network.
Well, on that note, we're going to have to say thank you, Scott. And I know that so many people have Justin Bieber in their back pocket to call on a campaign. So they'll make sure to savor that for right now. But I appreciate everything. And of course, anybody on the line here, we'll make sure and get a copy of the recording when it's all complete. Well, also, Scott will share his presentation with you. And Scott's information was also available in the presentation if you want to ask him any questions too as well. Scott, thanks. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, it was really fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you everybody on the line. Have a good rest of the week. Obviously, we got a couple hours maybe for some of us for that, but thank you so much. Have a great weekend. We'll join you again soon. Take care.